Well, hello, everyone. I am very excited to have this conversation with Alex today. This is a follow up from our first interview and part of the Level Up Your Career series over a year ago when Alex and I talked about her overarching career journey, her time in talent tech, and her focus on everything people technology. So now we are checking in with Alex again to hear where she's at in her career and to talk about all the exciting changes and projects that she's working on. But before we jump in, I'd love to pass it off to Alex if you wouldn't mind to do a quick little intro before we start our round of questions.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. It's so good to be back with you all. I always love participating in these conversations and events with your team. So thanks again for the opportunity to join you. My name is Alex Doyle. I am currently Chief of Staff to the Chief People Officer and HR Organization at Procore Technologies. I've been with the company now for 6 years. Prior to that, I was in nonprofit management and got my degree in communication and global studies. So a little bit of a winding path, and it's been really fun and exciting to revisit some of these moments in these conversations.
Absolutely. And to anyone who's curious on how Alex landed in this role, I'll also link out to our first interview so you can see just the amazing trajectory that she's on. But first, Alex, a lot has changed for you over the past few months. I would love if we can get a rundown of some of the most significant wins and changes that have happened for you.
Yeah. Wow. So I'll go back to last year because I had a lot of big life moments over the past year. 2022 was honestly a huge year of change for me. I got married to my partner. He and I met at Procore, so that was a fun little moment for us back in May. We moved to Denver over the summer from California, so that was a big change. I moved. I think this was potentially part of a previous conversation we had, but changed roles from a role in talent technology on the IT side of the house with Procore back into HR operations, supporting our international expansion. And at that point, sort of midway through last year, after all of that had happened, I took a step back to say, what do I really want out of my career next step? And what's the type of role that would really help me find the right balance, the right rigor, the right learning for myself, and allow me to do what I want to do both personally and professionally. I knew that I ideally wanted to stay at Procore. I love this company. I really love how I've been able to grow and experience a lot of change here. But I didn't really see a role that was posted that was of interest to me. So I had a lot of conversations internally and externally to figure out what that would be. And at the time, we were looking for our next chief people officer. So I had thought I kind of want to move into HR strategy. I want to do sort of a blend of strategy and ops. And the role of chief of staff sort of came to be. So I moved officially into this role in January of this year, but I was doing bits and pieces of it through Q4 of last year. So that's been a really, really great journey, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity.
Alex, I wish I had some sort of confetti cannon or t-shirt cannon to celebrate all these amazing wins. A year that's been full of changes, and in no small part to all the hard work that you've been putting in over the years. So really exciting stuff, and really happy that we can have this conversation and dive into a little bit deeper on your transition to chief of staff. While many people, myself included, have heard of the title Chief of Staff, many may not be familiar with what the role actually does.
Mhm.
Could you share a little bit more about the scope of the role and what it looks like specifically for you in your organization?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'll be totally honest with you, before about a year ago, when I started researching and getting to know this role through some of my peers that were doing it, I didn't really get it either myself. So you're not alone. It's a complex title for or complex role, and the title doesn't really explain it. So I'll give you a little bit of background. The role of chief of staff really originated many centuries ago, and it was more in the realm of military and government capacity, right? So now we are looking into the corporate world, the political world, and we see examples of that.
Mhm.
Most well-known example, probably to most folks in the US at least, is the White House Chief of Staff, right? It's the title we hear all the time. But in the corporate world, it's relatively new. Sometimes the role, I've seen it set as a rotational role where you kind of come in and you do the role for 1, 2, 3 years and then move on to another functional capacity. Sometimes it's a standing position. Not every executive in a corporate world needs a chief of staff. It's not the right role for every company or team or person. And it's for that reason very fit for purpose, right? You're sort of creating the role to be what it needs to be for the team at the time, and flex with the team and the executive as they grow and develop their organization. And despite that flex, there are some sort of standing or more consistent areas of responsibility. And those show up for myself and most of the chiefs of staff at Procore, as well as others that I have talked to in the industry. So typical responsibilities like that include setting and measuring the team's strategy in partnership with the other leaders, time management and effectiveness of leadership teams, ton of relationship management. I would say that's the heart of my role, is building partnerships, understanding what different partners are doing, the beat of their teams, right? All to build a cohesive strategy that's thoughtful and integrated with what they're doing. A lot of communication, building comms plans, communication out to your organizations, being the voice of your leader or leaders on the team. Some organizational change management. So say you're going through a leadership transition, say you're restructuring your organization, a lot of support sort of horizontally to the teams there. And then many chiefs of staff, especially at smaller organizations, will often be tasked with special project management for really high profile or high impact work. So those are some of the key areas of responsibility that I have and that I see in others with this role.
A couple keywords really popped out to me. I think strategy being the main one. And I can 100% attest to the fact that this role is a great fit for you. And when we worked together last year for the conference and we worked on that panel, you really exuded all those characteristics, especially focusing on strategy, collaboration, leadership. So I can see how all of those skills really come together for you in this role.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I'd love to dig a little bit deeper into the transition to chief of staff. I'm really interested in people's career journeys, how they change over time. So curious to know if this position was always a career goal for you, and if not, how and why did you choose to pursue it at this stage in your career?
Yeah, it definitely wasn't a career goal, because back to my earlier comment, I didn't really even know what this role was, or that I, with my skill set, could have a path to this, I'll be honest. So no, it wasn't a goal in that sense. I think some of the things I'm working on were a goal of mine, but not packaged this way. The way that it sort of came to life for me is I was paying attention to some of the career paths of some of the people that I was sort of most fond of working with or admired the most. A lot of them were doing work in the strategy space. Some of them, a few of them actually by title at Procore. Some of the industry connections that I had taken this path. So it started to become a reality that, hey, like I have elements of that path. Maybe I could do this too. I started talking to them a lot about, what they did day to day, to just get a sense of like, am I really interested here? And then over the course of that exploration, Procore also started to invest in this role, in this capacity, at a few levels of the organization. So that was also a new reality for us, right? I mentioned when we were talking a second ago about how the role is a little bit temporal, right? It's a time and a place. And so Procore had started to become ready for people in this capacity as my interest in it started to grow. So that's sort of the journey to learning about it. Why did I sort of pick up on it as a potential path? And the reason that I chose to pursue it at this stage is I was really ready to move. I had most of my career in very operational capacities: project management, talent technology delivery and excellence, recruiting operations. So I was in the ops space a lot, and I was really ready to start leveraging that to power the build of a strategy for an organization. And that blend was super attractive. The third component, in addition to strategy and ops, is really the human element of this role. So I talked about it being very heavy on the relationship side. That's my truest passion. Like if I could go back to school today, I'd probably be an organizational psychologist. So it really blended those things very well. And it also allowed me to do it in an area I had a lot of experience tactically. So in the HR space, chief of staff roles have skills that translate, but to be a domain expert, I think is really important to be a super effective chief of staff and to build strategy. So it's not to say that I couldn't I've seen people do it. HR chief of staff and move it over to a revenue capacity, but you'd have to put in the work, right? You have to learn that business and how they operate in depth. So for me, HR had been my home, and it was just a natural progression to then allow me to work horizontally. So all that's to say, didn't plan for it, but it's the right, moment in time for me to move here into this capacity. And it allows me to sort of think about what I want even longer term. So playing in all aspects of Procore's business model, understanding all the players in the game, and then really connecting with folks in industry. So there will be more to come on the journey, but that's a little bit about the story so far.
Amazing. Well, while it sounds like you may have not necessarily like planned at this as your career aspiration, you definitely were proactive throughout your career, and then applied those learnings and then your background in HR to really make yourself successful in this role. And I think that's something that we're going to touch on a little bit more when we talk about how to prep for this role. But I would like to focus on some of your top priorities. Given the current macro environment, what are some of your top priorities that you are focusing on this year as chief of staff? And maybe if you could share some of your biggest considerations.
Yeah, there's so much. So, I mean, as I mentioned before, right, the role is very time and place, and it flexes a lot to the needs of the executive that you're supporting, to the needs of the business, to the market, right? There's just so many factors. So a day in the life can look really different for me. Typically though, I'll share sort of what that normal day-to-day looks like, and then some of the bigger priorities we're looking at more broadly. It's quite a meeting heavy role. The nature of it being relationship driven, there's a lot of meetings. I meet with people all the time. I meet with them for different reasons, right? I'm checking in on our leadership team. How are they doing? Where do they need support? Where are they experiencing some hot spots in their organization? So there's sort of awareness building meetings. There's relationship or partnership building meetings where I'm going across the aisle to partner teams and understanding, how are they working? Where do they need support? Where can we connect and collaborate better? Welcoming new leaders, planning for that. I do a lot of meeting facilitation, both for projects that I'm supporting, but also for our leadership team. So a lot of stuff day to day feels like you're sort of in the muck, but when I zoom out a little bit, the priorities that I have that are driving a lot of these meetings are a lot around the fact that we've just welcomed a new CPO to Procore. We are welcoming new leaders alongside her. And we're managing a lot of that change together. So, what does our strategy look like going forward is a huge priority. How do we build that? How do we think holistically and long-term? In building a new leadership team, I've been spending a lot of time interviewing and prepping onboarding support for them, supporting communication around those shifts and things like that. So those pieces, right? Strategy, the team change management is a huge top priority. Looking a little bit farther down the line, my role will support pretty directly in partnership with many others. We'll support directly with annual planning for our organization. So taking a look at our strategy and saying, what are we actually doing in 2024? That process at a company of Procore size can be 6 months long. So typically for us, that starts sort of late summer and goes through end of year, early following. So that will be very, very heavy priority in the back half of the year. And then just for me personally, just trying to get grounded in this space and how can I help my team and my leaders be the most effective versions of themselves? And then what do I need for myself? Because this is a big change. It's a heavy role, super time consuming, very, very complex. And so a lot of sort of introspection and just conversation on that. So I'd say those are like my big priorities at the moment, and they'll change as the year goes on.
Definitely. Well, it sounds like, strategy is your bread and butter. Wow. So looking back on your winding career path, what would you say helped you to prepare to be an effective chief of staff? And what type of guidance would you give to other people who are interested in pursuing this role?
Yeah, I've gotten that question a few times. I'm still formulating my answer, right? Because I'm still new to this role myself. But one thing that I will say is that this role for me, unlike some of my other shifts in the past, was a little bit more organic. than, intentional. And I don't mean to say you shouldn't be intentional about if you are pursuing, like, I want to be a chief of staff, that's fantastic, go get it. But I've found that having come into Procore, and even my experience prior in nonprofit management, in program management, things like that, evolved into the roles that I was looking at next, and actually got me a very well-rounded picture of the business that I was supporting and of how companies work. So it wasn't like, okay, here I have to do exactly these things and move exactly on this path, but being open to trying out a role for 4 years in IT, absolutely huge. My understanding, appreciation of systems, data, security, infrastructure would never have had without that. Being willing to spend time with the international portion of our business was absolutely massive. That 9 months, I got exposure, met tons of folks that were supporting our go-to-market motion outside of the US. That was critical. So the level of diversity has allowed me to sort of jump into this with a baseline business acumen. That's critical. I would say if you are looking at this role and you're wanting to be intentional about it, that's the most important piece that I can offer you is don't stick to your functional role, but try to understand the way that the business operates as an ecosystem. All the dependent players, all the dependent parts. I think of myself as a very high level generalist, and then I specialize in certain things, but that horizontal focus is critical, and I got it organically. So I'm very grateful for that. I also was fortunate to join Procore at a time when we were a lot smaller. So I joined at about 850 employees. We're now 3,500. I joined when we were only in the US. We're now in 11 countries. I have gone through, as I mentioned, multiple organizations and leadership changes. So that gave me a platform to say, I really understand Procore now, and I can apply myself in that way. I also was proactive in just sort of taking stabs at looking external to my role as I went. So that's something I would definitely offer folks. Meet with people, try to understand what they do, get exposure. One of the other things that I also think a lot about is this role is typically an individual contributor role. I've managed teams, I've been an IC, but it can be lonely, right? You got to learn to operate on your own, be the self-starter, self-motivated, and not afraid of driving work solo. So that's a skill that if you don't feel comfortable with that yet, take some passes at it, right? Really drive some projects as an individual, having to rely on business partners, right? Folks that don't report to you. That is something that I would recommend. And then building those partnerships and relationships, as I mentioned before. So given I don't have direct reports, having those relationships coming into this role was huge. So those are just some of the things that I think are top of mind. There's a lot of other, if you talk to other chiefs of staff, I mean, brilliant people that will give you lots of great advice, but I would really focus on business acumen, building relationships, and then getting comfortable with, driving things on your own. And what does that look like to leverage partners? Those are some key skills.
I love that you mentioned having a really good understanding horizontally of what's going on in the business. I would encourage anyone who is maybe looking to become a chief of staff or put that on their career journey, maybe do a roadshow through the different teams, get an understanding of their needs, their pain points, and how awesome that happened organically for you. It definitely lended so well to where you are. And again, being proactive, I see that as a common thread in your career journey and these conversations too, is if you have something in your sights, start doing something day by day that can start to get you there. So whether that be for you, meeting with different people, getting influenced by the diversity, I think that really, really helps you be successful in this role that you have. So amazing work. I think these are amazing pieces of advice for anyone that's looking to become a chief of staff. How cool would it be, when kids go into show and tell and everyone's like, I want to be a firefighter. I want to be a teacher. Maybe one day after this video, someone's going to be, I want to be a chief of staff. You never know.
I would love that. Right alongside the dancers and the singers, we got, this big corporate title. Hilarious. I love that too.
Well, thank you for your pieces of advice. So I'd love to kind of flip that over. So let's say we filled an entire room with other chief of staffs. What are some
Mhm.
topics that you would love to pick their brains about?
It's so funny that you asked this question because at Procore, we actually did build a virtual room, obviously, of chiefs of staff across the company. We called the Chief of Staff Interlock, and this is far from the only networking group for chiefs of staff out there. There are tons more. I'm a part of the Chief of Staff Network. There's a number of others, but all of these groups exist for exactly that purpose, to sort of come together, share best practices, ask each other questions, right? And say, what are you doing to solve this problem? Or how are you approaching this? So the Chief of Staff Network at Procore is fairly new. We started it earlier this year. We get together monthly to talk about sort of hot topics in the business for Procore or otherwise, pick each other's brains on certain things that are in flight. And some of the things that we have prioritized tackling, they're sort of top of mind for us, are how do you build a really robust strategy, right? That's sort of obvious. What's your approach? How do you track against that strategy to make sure that you're delivering on your target outcomes? We just had a meeting actually last week it was, talking about meeting structure and effectiveness. So how do you meet with your leadership team? What are the topics that you raise? How do you structure them to make them worthwhile for the team and be impactful? We are also going to talk about things like onboarding new leaders, transition plans for organizations. How do you sort of manage change at that scale? And one of the topics that I'm actually personally most excited about is really collaborating with them on what does the chief of staff role look like for Procore longer term, right? What's some of the questions you even asked, right? What are the things that would help you path into this role or out of this role, right? Where do we go from here? What's the future for a chief of staff? Especially if you're in more of a rotational capacity, right? Or a shorter term, what do you do to build your skills? So that's really, really cool to have that forum, as I mentioned, because it can be a little bit of a lonely role, right? You're meeting with your leadership team and your executive that you support, but having a peer set is something that has been really valuable to me. So I've leaned on that team a lot. I talk to them constantly, ask them for advice, ask them for their templates and frameworks. And then, other things that are going into our strategy, like data benchmarks or how they're approaching cuts of financial data, like things that are much more tactical, we also dive into. But yeah, those are some of the topics that we've covered recently, actually, in this group.
I wanted to ring a bell, throw up my hands when you said you joined a community of, chief of staffs too. I cannot stress as much as I can about the power of community. I'm in a community for community managers, and just having that peer interaction, people who are working in that industry, it's such a great place to knowledge share. And so many people are willing to go the extra mile to share their experiences or help you out than you'd think. So if you're not plugged into a community like Alex's, I would definitely recommend it. It'll definitely do wonders. Well, those are kind of the most hard-hitting questions. Thank you so much for answering them. So I'd love to close out with, the red carpet for you. This is your time to make any special announcements or shout outs, anything that you would like to share in these final moments of our conversation.
Well, piggyback on what you said about community, right? Because I'll just express a moment of gratitude for Systematic. I joined the community back when I was in IT. So it's been, 3.5, 4 years ago. And it's been part of my journey in so many ways, right? I'm not even in business technology anymore, right? I left business technology over a year ago. I'm in HR ops. I'm now in the chief of staff role. But it's been a really important part of my journey. And I have attended many events, met a lot of people through the network, and have been able to grow and get answers to sort of critical questions. So just a little plug there while you made me think of it. And obviously the communities more broadly for chief of staff are typically reserved for folks already operating in this role, but there are some that are starting that are actually for people that are prospective chief of staff, right? So Ask a Chief of Staff is one of those. There's a number of different articles you can read. I can link out some of those, Mary, if we want to share those when we post this.
Absolutely.
But there's a lot of resources out there, and I have reached out personally to a lot of chiefs of staff on LinkedIn as I was exploring this role. And now that I've been in the role, people are happy to talk through it, right? And share. It's such a complex role. Most people have a winding path to it. So I just want to say thank you to those that I've been able to lean on, the folks at Procore that have been supporters of my career journey along the way and given me the insight I need to be successful in this role. It's very much not something that I have done on my own. There's a network of people that are sort of wind beneath my wings on this one. So that's my set of shout outs. And thank you to you for always being such a great person to have a conversation with. It's fun to hang out.
Well, thank you, Alex. You were definitely one to watch. I've loved just chatting about your different career paths and your choices. I think your dedication to just people as a whole, your proactive attitude, and always just being humble. It's always great to have these conversations. I'm so excited for what you're going to do in this role and, for more to come. So excited to keep the conversation going.
Sounds good. We'll stay in touch. Thanks again, Mary.
Of course. Thank you.